Technology can make learning Chinese easier, not by doing the learning for you, but by helping you spend more time on what actually matters: listening, reading, and communicating in Chinese. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about how you can leverage technology to make Chinese easier to learn. For most of history, learners have been limited by where they live, what they have access to in terms of learning materials, native speakers, etc. One of the most important changes brought about by digital technology is that distances have shrunk. You can now communicate with people all around the world, and you can perfectly well learn Chinese from the comfort of your home. You can immerse in the language by using audio, video, and text, and there is so much content available online that you will never be able to study even a small fraction of it. To learn Chinese, you need exposure and engagement with the language, you need material at the right level, you need some feedback on the way you use Mandarin, and you also need enough time for all these things to accumulate. Technology helps with all four, so as mentioned, it gives you access to unlimited amounts of listening and reading, and it can also help make this more accessible and more comprehensible. Quantity has a quality of its own here. Because there is so much content available, you can also choose content that is more aligned with your goals and which is at the right level. You can also communicate with people online, verbally or in writing, and thereby also get feedback on the Chinese that you use yourself. Finally, technology also enables you to spend more time engaging with the language and less time on things that don't really matter or don't help you learn the language, such as flipping through pages in a dictionary to find an unknown character. In this episode, I'm going to focus on the positive side of technology, how you can use it to learn more or make Chinese easier to learn, and in a follow-up episode, I'm going to focus on the downsides, on the dangers of relying too much on technology. In general, though, technology is a tool, so it matters greatly how you use it. If technology can help you engage more with Chinese and spend more time engaging with the language, that's a good thing. But if it stops you from doing that or does the work for you, then using technology can be a bad thing. Let's dig into the first major benefit, which is that digital tools help you spend more time with Chinese. I started learning Chinese in 2007, and back then there weren't really any good digital dictionaries. There were a few, but they were extremely hard to use and mainly relied on the same principle as paper dictionaries, i.e. that you had to know the radical, count strokes, and then flip through pages. This took an extraordinary amount of time, and I remember spending hours just trying to find the characters in text that I tried to read. The problem here is that you don't learn Chinese simply by flipping through pages in a book. You learn almost nothing by doing that. So having access to digital texts and digital dictionaries is extremely useful, because then you can spend all that time that I wasted looking up characters on actually reading the text. Furthermore, because there is so much content available and you can often choose something which is aligned with your interest and level already, and you don't need to scaffold or use dictionaries that much, you will be able to spend much more time with Chinese, whether it's reading or listening. Indeed, today the opposite can be a problem. There is so much to choose from that you spend all your time trying to find the perfect resource, but as mentioned, I will cover the downsides of technology in the follow-up episode. Still, the fact that there are learning materials available, and often for free, matters greatly and makes Chinese easier to learn. A good example of this is YouTube, and even if there was, of course, video content before YouTube, there certainly wasn't enough of it and it was very hard to access. Today there are hundreds, if not thousands, of learner-oriented channels on YouTube, and while not all of them are great, having access to this content is awesome. In other articles and episodes, I have recommended the best YouTube videos, the best podcasts, etc., so I will not say too much about it here, but please check the show notes for more information. The difference here is particularly big for beginners, and especially zero beginners, which used to be a very awkward spot because there wasn't really anything you could read or anything you could listen to, unless you happened to have a teacher who could talk to you one-on-one on your level. Today, there are many good YouTube channels which teach Chinese in Chinese to zero beginners without using any English. The reason this works is, of course, because of the video format, so they can rely on body language, gestures, images, and other forms of support. Again, most of this content is available for free, and having this much content you can dive straight into as a zero beginner makes learning Chinese both more enjoyable and more effective. Without the internet, most people would still be using textbooks to learn vocabulary and grammar, and then maybe sometime in the future they could understand something produced in Chinese. But now you can do that from day one. Naturally, this is not only because of technology. We have also seen a shift in how people teach Chinese. So comprehension-based methods weren't as common 20 years ago, but now it's not hard to find teachers who teach this way on, for example, YouTube. The next major benefit is that online tools bring Chinese-speaking people within reach. I already talked about this briefly, but let's not underestimate the importance of being able to connect with Chinese speakers no matter where you live. Maybe you hire a tutor, or you find a language exchange partner, or perhaps you engage in some kind of community online. This is of course not the same as traveling to or living in a Chinese-speaking environment, but it brings you a lot closer than you could get without digital technology. Next up, typing lets you write Chinese without handwriting everything. This benefit is more significant than people think, because it used to be the case that if you wanted to communicate in writing, you had to learn to write by hand. Whereas these days you can type, which only requires you to know how the words are pronounced and sometimes also recognize what they look like on the page. But recognizing the correct word is a lot easier than writing it by hand. This frees up an extraordinary amount of time that you can then invest into something more meaningful, such as typing, for example, or more listening and reading. It also means that written communication with other people online is accessible early on, rather than just being a major time sink. When I started learning Chinese, we had to learn how to write all the characters we encountered, and we ended up spending most of our study time learning how to write characters. And even if there are institutions that require you to do that today too, this is less common, and if you can choose, you definitely shouldn't spend all your time on handwriting, unless you really love characters. For a more detailed discussion about the role of handwriting Chinese characters in Chinese language education, please see episode 199, Chinese Character Learning for All Students. And as usual, I'll put links in the show notes. Next up, digital scaffolding lets you reach slightly beyond your current level. In educational context, scaffolding means a supporting structure that allows you to reach beyond your current level, and technology can provide some excellent scaffolding for language learners. I've already mentioned dictionaries, but there are many other ways that technology can support your reading and listening. For example, you can use an AI tool to generate a simplified summary of what you're going to listen to, so you have the gist before you even start. Or you can search for related terms online to automatically show you images of what you're going to listen to, so you have some idea of what's going to happen. The goal here is to make difficult texts and audio easier to understand by placing it in context. So rather than just starting listening to something you have no clue what it's about, you know a little bit in advance. And this not just helps you understand what's being said, it's also more realistic, because when we listen in the real world, we can usually see who's talking, we know what situation we're in, and so on. Even if the goal here is to focus on the upsides of technology, I also want to say that this is only a benefit if you use it to open doors and give you opportunities to understand more, not if you let technology do the work for you. For example, if you have subtitles in your native language, you might end up reading those instead of listening to the Chinese, and if you understand Chinese through the use of another language, it could be argued that you are no longer listening to Chinese or reading. The next problem we're going to look at is that software can handle practice humans cannot reasonably provide. So for example, a teacher will have limited patience, or you will have limited money to hire said teacher, but if you practice with a chatbot, you can just keep going for as long as you want. There are also many tasks that would be prohibitively time expensive to do manually, such as scheduling thousands of flashcards or similar tasks. Next, let's talk a little bit about AI, and even if AI itself is maybe not an advantage of technology, but rather a kind of technology that can be used for many things, I think we should talk about it explicitly here too. AI, and when I say AI, I mean mostly generative artificial intelligence and large language models, can be very useful when it solves real learning problems. For example, if you're reading something difficult and get stuck, rather than waiting for your teacher to have time to help you out or ask a friendly native speaker, asking a chatbot will usually solve your problem. You can also use chatbots to help you explain different things, but in general, I think they are more useful locally. So for example, chatbots are great at explaining a specific sentence, but they are not as good as explaining linguistic phenomena in general. So you can ask what le does in this sentence, but I don't recommend that you ask it how to use le in general. This is not necessarily because the answer is always wrong or bad, but because this type of question isn't as useful, and it's very hard as a beginner or even intermediate learner to judge whether the output is accurate or not, or the answer is indeed helpful. The biggest advantage of AI is not that it's more reliable, more accurate and so on though, it is that it is very fast, it's very flexible, and it's basically always available. As I said earlier, you don't have to wait until you have a human around to ask, you can just get your answer immediately. And even if it might not be entirely reliable, answers from humans are not entirely reliable either. In many cases, speed also makes the feedback more useful. So if we compare writing in a formal institutional setting, you maybe write a text, hand it in to the teacher, and you get something back in a week or two. By that time, you might largely have forgotten about the text or why you wrote it in a certain way or why you picked one word over another. And then you get the feedback and most students just nod and throw it away. With AI, you can get your feedback in 5 seconds, and then you can start working on your issues immediately, and you can learn a lot by doing so. Just remember what I said earlier, you should use technology to help you engage with the language, not do the learning for you. Another area where I think AI and digital tools can be helpful is to provide low-stress practice to prepare you for real communication. And when I say real communication here, I mean talking with someone in Chinese, online or offline, as opposed to just learning the language or studying something on your own. Many students, myself included, are rather introverted, and just talking to people can feel rather scary, but technology offers a lot of ways to practice in a low-stress or low-stakes environment. For example, you can use an AI chatbot to prepare for a conversation in advance and talk about similar subjects. And if you have an important oral presentation in class, you can practice this with an AI. These benefits are not limited to AI, of course. One of my favorite ways of practicing low-stakes speaking is to do voice messages. So instead of typing what you want to say to your friend or language exchange partner, you record short audio messages. This feels a lot easier than having a live conversation, but it's also a lot closer to having that live conversation than typing would be. By using activities like these, you can gradually build confidence and work your way towards live conversations. All this means that technology, and AI in particular, has redefined what teachers do, or at least what you should do with your teacher. In general, don't rely on teachers to do things you can equally well do on your own much faster with other tools. If your tutoring session is largely about your teacher introducing new words and telling you what they mean, this is something you don't need a teacher to do, you could do it on your own. Or you could just skip it entirely, because introducing or encountering a lot of new words when listening, speaking, reading and writing is not very helpful. Similarly, you can rely on chatbots for quick feedback on your writing to see if your Chinese makes sense or not, and rely on human teachers for things that AI does very poorly, such as speaking feedback or just having a normal human conversation. I don't think chatbots will supplant teachers anytime soon, but they sure have redefined what you should use a teacher for. It used to be the case that you had to rely on a teacher to get certain things, but now you can get these things by using AI or by searching online. To summarize, I think that technology has changed the landscape for Chinese learners a lot, and it's hard to appreciate how much if you started learning recently. And indeed, it's even hard for me to grasp what it was like to learn Chinese in the previous century, because when I started, at least the internet existed, there were a few learner podcasts out there, and spaced repetition software existed, although I didn't have access to a smartphone. Fun fact, I actually bought my first smartphone only because I wanted to use these programs on my phone. If you want to zoom out even further and look at this digital revolution, and specifically for Chinese reading then, you should check out David Moser's guest article on Hacking Chinese. It's called The New Paperless Revolution in Chinese Reading, and even if it isn't new anymore, it is still relevant. And I will make sure to put a link in the show notes. It's time to wrap up this episode by saying that technology is a tool, or it's a range of tools that you can use to learn Mandarin. Whether this is mostly good or bad depends on how you use the technology, but if you use it to engage more with listening and reading that you can largely make sense of and to communicate with other people, it is certainly for the better. Used incorrectly, however, technology can be an expensive distraction that reduces meaningful engagement with the language, but more about that in the follow-up episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.